Today, we'll talk about spreads. Lately, we've talked about how cheap mortgage bonds are. So let's get into the heart of that matter real quick. This screen here is WBIX on Bloomberg World Bond Indices. Over here to the right, we have year-to-date return. But important to this conversation is OAS, option adjusted spread. And you can see the spread here. I'm looking at the US MBS AG, Bloomberg AG, at only 47 basis points, option adjusted spread, whereas corporates are at about 87. What drives that? And if you go out and you buy generic mortgage bonds, what spread are you investing at? Okay, so I'm going to flip in. I'm going to go to that AG, that mortgage-backed AG for Bloomberg. We can look here. OAS is about 47 basis points. This is about a $7 trillion index, about 1,000 members. Look over here to the right. These are the top. This is a market-weighted index. So what's out there in mortgage bonds, what's been issued on the agency side only, is what's in the index. You could see here your top 6, 7, 8 components are all 2 and 2.5% coupon mortgages. These are bonds that were issued 2 to 3 years ago at very low coupons. You could see this one here is actually a 7% weighting, a giant weighting within that index. Let's look at that Fanny 2. The government and banks are the primary owners of this bond. We're going to look at Fannie 2s and Fannie 2.5s. This bond here is priced at 77 handle with a spread of only 75 basis points. Okay, you're going out, you're buying a 7-year duration, 10-year average life bond at 75 basis points over. Compare that to corporates, which are actually about an 87 basis point over for a very similar duration, about a 7-year duration. Okay, so you would get a better spread in corporates, a better yield for basically the same duration. These are underlying loans that are paying a 2.9% coupon, estimated to pay off at maybe 5 CPR for life. Okay, you do have upside to faster prepayments. Prepayments are 10 or 15 CPR for life. You get a better yield, you shorten, you get a much better spread because you're also shortening where you are in the curve. Looking at Fannie 2.5s, you get about a 76 basis point spread. What some folks will talk about is current coupon spread. So let's look at all outstanding mortgage TBAs, or most of them. You start with 2.5s. We saw 2s were at about 77. 2.5s are at 80. The par coupon bond, or the one that's closest to par, is called Fannie 6s. Okay. So if I look at Fannie 6s here, a 6% coupon at a little over par dollar price. Let's pull that bond up. Your prepayments are estimated to be a little bit faster at about 15 CPR per year. They term that in PSA here, but your spread to that average prepayment assumption is much higher than what you'd be getting in 2s or 2.5s. You're getting about 146 basis points of spread over the 5-year. So instead of getting a 520 yield, you're getting a 590 yield. So that leads you to current coupon. This is a current coupon spread, which is very attractive right now. If we go back into history, let's go back just the last 5 years. Pre-COVID, spreads ranged about 80 to 90 basis points over US Treasuries. COVID spreads peaked at about 185, 190. That's your current coupon spread. But post-COVID, spreads got to as low as 60 to 65 basis points. Okay. Right here, this is when banks stopped buying. Right here, this is when the government announced they're going to stop buying mortgage bonds. So spreads have been extremely wide, 140 out to about 180 over the last 2 years or so. Okay, so your current coupon spread starts at about 141. Let's compare that to corporates. Okay, so if you go out and you're buying a new issue MBS, you're likely buying that Fannie 6 because those Fannie 2.5s and Fannie 3s, they're not being created right now. But contrast that with what's actually in the index. If you're to go out and to buy a mortgage index fund or buy an ag fund, this is what you're buying. You're buying bonds where the underlying borrowers may never prepay, and at very low coupons and low spreads, only a 75 basis point spread. So your current coupon spread compared to corporates, I have corporates here in red and in blue. The blue line here is investment grade corporates. The red line is high yield corporates. The white line here are agencies. Very similar conversation. You started to see some widening relative to corporates in February of 2022. You saw further widening in the fall of 2022 when the government stopped buying. But we want to take this all into consideration when we think about mortgage spreads. What are the main drivers of mortgage spreads? A, volatility. B, supply and demand. 2/3 almost of the demand for agency mortgage bonds is gone. Banks and the US government haven't been buying. What's driving demand? What's driving the spread tightening on corporates? Retail demand. Okay. But it's a tale of two worlds when we think about spreads in general. You can't just go buy the index because the index is comprised of very tight spread instruments. You have to look at newer issue mortgage bonds, Fanny 5.5s, Fanny 6s, to get a much higher spread. But further to that, this is about a 5.90 yield. There's a secret. Because the curve is so inverted, and we talked about this last week, agency floating rate paper is actually yielding higher because you're on a better part of the curve. This is off the 4.5-year part of the curve. If you can buy floating rate paper, which is about a 115 or 120 spread, that's off of the front end of the curve. So you're getting over a 6.5% yield on agency government guaranteed floaters, even at tighter spread, because your 150 spread, 140 spread bonds here are off of this part of the curve. So you're not getting a 6% yield even on the agency fixed. That said, you're better off in those newer coupon agency bonds, we think, relative to the old coupons that might be in an ag fund or an index fund, because for all intents and purposes, you're getting a higher yield and a higher spread. Thank you for your time.